I went to somewhere of eternal torment. I was unable to speak. I was trying to get the Jesus prayer out because I knew there was evil trying to drag me.
Hello and welcome to the Theoria podcast. Today I speak with Zach, a Cradle Orthodox who stopped going to church and really practicing around 5 or 6 years of age. But then some paranormal things started happening in his life and he realized he needed to figure out what he believed. Our conversation is engaging and I would love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. So you grew up in the church and there were a number of different things that happened in your own life and in your own parish that caused some difficulty with faith and life. Could you tell me about your experience growing up in the church and where that led you and sort of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously I was baptized in the faith. I think my grandparents had a really large influence on that. And obviously with my uncle being an Orthodox priest as well, that had some influence there. I want to say it was probably I was 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 years old was the last time I had really gone to church consistently. And so from that point on, really up until recently, I had not really an absence in complete faith, but I had a pretty broad absence and really didn't have much faith up until when I got into high school. That's kind of when I started to have more questions and things like that. A lot of that came from my heritage background. I remember in 9th grade history, we had a project we had to do on our, basically on our heritage, and being of Eastern European descent, both on my grandmother's side and my grandfather's side. My grandmother Polish, she was raised Polish national, but later converted to Orthodox when she met my grandfather. My grandfather being Russian. We had always held on to some of our cultural beliefs and heritage, things like food and, some of the general things. So I remember we had to put together a project for that, and I started to grow a little bit more interested in that at that point. And I do remember in 9th grade when we were learning about the Reformation and all that, I remember asking my 9th grade history teacher, so when did the Orthodox Church come about? Because I still hadn't really known a lot then. And now looking back, I really wish I would have known because I would have corrected her because she did say in the Protestant Reformation. And
Wow.
I'm like this now. I'm like, there's no way.
So was this a Catholic school or was this a public?
Public school.
Oh, wow. So Orthodox came about in the Reformation.
Yep. So I really wish I would have known that.
What was your take from there on? It sounds like it was really the culture that started bringing you back to the faith.
It did. So the real bringing point that sort of kind of got me really involved in the faith, 10th grade came around and my great-grandmother had passed away. I didn't have like a super, super strong relationship with her, but I had enough of a relationship that we knew, she knew us, we loved her, she loved us, kind of thing. And that was the first funeral I had been to, and her being Orthodox as well. That was an Orthodox funeral, and I remember the Trisagion hymn and Memory Eternal just opening me up in a way I had never felt before. And so my interest in general faith kind of grew from there. And that's when things more or less like the Big Bang and evolution started to make less and less sense to me. And I wasn't really sure where I was at that point in entirety. I kind of started taking on more of an agnostic point of view. While having some of those Orthodox beliefs in there, I didn't accept it in its entirety. So kind of throughout that time period, I had just that general perception of things, and that kind of grew and grew throughout high school. I mean, there was at times where I was pretty much believing in anything and everything, as I put it at the time, that was peaceful. That wasn't, about the about the occult or anything like that, but in a lot of ways it kind of did draw me into some of that stuff. You know, with some of my upbringing too, you know, my dad was in the military, and my parents, before we were born, me and my siblings, they had moved all over the country, and there was a point they were living in Long Beach, California. And basically what had happened was there was this homeless lady that was in their neighborhood, and my mom would help her or whatever. She'd give her food and give her cats food because she had cats or whatever. And this was next door on a vacant property, and the landlord of that property said, "We really don't want her here anymore. You know, if she comes back, please call the police to have her escorted away." And the next day, as my mom put it, she was out in the yard performing some sort of witchcraft and some sort of ritual. And from that point, all the way till they moved back to Connecticut in 1996, we had all sorts of strange occurrences happening. And as she put it then, in California, that out of nowhere, this large gust of wind came, flew the door open, flew everything open. But the one thing that really stuck was, no matter where they moved to, every single evening, I believe it was at midnight, all the fire alarms would go off simultaneously in the house, every single night.
Oh my.
Every single night. And so my uncle had actually done a whole house cleansing here in this house that I'm currently talking to you with, and he had to physically burn crosses in the doors.
Oh yeah, so with the flame to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just that strong of a being. And so I've always kind of had some of those, you know, I've always believed in that side of things, that there is definitely evil and there is good, but I didn't have a fully immersed, you know, understanding. I didn't have a doctrine to follow. It was a very loose interpretation. And so my mother's always been strong with that sort of stuff as well. And, you know, like I said, I didn't really get into Buddhism. I had a strong interest in it. But I would even go as far to say I had belief in fictional religions. Avatar: The Last Airbender, 100%, you know, believed in all those balances in that way. Even Star Wars, I had a strong belief in that aspect of the Force, in the very agnostic point of view, believing that there is something, but I didn't know what it was, kind of thing. I didn't know the divine power. You know, crystals, dream catchers, all that kind of stuff. And I remember even up until, I want to say 11th grade, I was very into Native American influence in general, as we had learned that in American history. At the time, I thought I had a very strong connection to it, and we don't really even have that much percentage of Native in us, but I remember watching Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and some of those scenes were just very impactful. And so when I kind of got out of high school, I had attended a few liturgy services and a few Vespers, but it didn't really have much significant meaning at the time. Basically, I had kind of gone through, and like I said, did have some of that belief. And one thing that always sticks with me was with my grandmother. Because she pretty much lived with us. She lived with us pretty much my whole life, so she was basically like a second mother to me and my brothers. And I remember every Pascha she would always teach me, you know, what we say and how we say it. And I do remember there was one year I started to learn some of the Russian of it, and the look and astounding joy on her face is just, it was priceless to have that connection with her. So I really did have that strong connection to Pascha. And so then kind of from there, I kept with that. I was learning about everything. I really was. And I would say I really did have strong Orthodox beliefs, but I couldn't drop all my other beliefs. So then when I got out of high school, I took my EMT class pretty much immediately. I was very disgruntled. I really wasn't that great in school, so I really wanted to just get out in the workforce, and I didn't want to have to go and get my degree and do anything like that. So I went and I started my EMT, and I kind of barely got by passing. And the time came up for my testing, and I didn't do so well. I got very discouraged, and after I got through that, my grandmother had been in and out of the hospital numerous times, and there was one incident that basically that was kind of her downfall in, was that 2018? That was her start of decline in health. And from that there was a lot to kind of take from that, So we got through that year, and then I decided I retook my EMT course. And again, in the middle of retaking my course, my grandfather passed away. And this is one of the stories I actually haven't shared with many others. I don't even know if I've actually shared it with my uncle. I'll definitely have to, because he's very strongly connected in this story. We were in the hospital. My grandfather died in the hospital. And we had basically put him on end-of-life care at that point because of his worsening condition. He had a lot of health problems to begin with, and there was just nothing more that they were going to be able to do. And I remember at the point of him no longer being verbal at that point because of the heavy sedation of medications, I went over into the family room, and I didn't really know what else to do at the time. And like I said, I had a very strong connection at the time to other Eastern religions, so I had my headphones with me. I put on Tibetan bowls, and I was just trying to just think clearly to try and make sense of what's going on. And I remember seeing this. The angel came down and touched him, and I remember seeing that. And then only later to come and find out, my uncle said, before my grandfather, when he was still talking in the hospital bed, he said, "It's okay, I see the angel." He said that to my uncle. And so for me, that was one of those things that still kind of sticks with me to this day. And so with that, there was another point of getting into, the Orthodox funeral, memory, eternal, the Trisagion hymn. It all hit me in that same way as it had with my great-grandmother, years prior. And for me, it brought a sincere, genuine connection into the church. And again, I still had strong interest, but I was still very hesitant. I wasn't entirely sure at the time. And so I went through that whole time. That was a very hard grieving process for all of us. We ended up getting through that, and I want to say I probably did attend another few liturgies, Vespers, and I had interest, but I wasn't entirely there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like when these points of the spiritual world breaking through sounded like with the experience with this evil spirit or whatever's going on with the fire alarms. That's a point where you're kind of realizing, man, I need to figure out what's going on here. There's some sort of reality that I can no longer ignore. And the same thing with the story of the angel. And that strikes me as extremely compelling, because we have points in our life, lulls, St. Sophrony calls them the desert, where we're just kind of slogging through, and we're trying to say our prayers, or we're just trying to get to the next day. And then we have these points of breaking in, and when we are prepared, in a sense, to deal with these things. It can be a great joy. So in the desert, that's sort of what we're trying to do is prepare our hearts, prepare ourselves. And I'll share with you a quick story why I may be thinking this way. When we were pregnant with our first child, we were looking into orthodoxy. This is over a decade ago. And Mallory woke up, and the whole pregnancy, she felt berated by kind of like evil, like there's a definitive war going on while we were looking into orthodoxy. And she woke up and she just had this innate motherly sense, like there are evil spirits here. And I, as the husband, was really ashamed at that point because I had no idea what to do. And at that point, the story goes, there are some other things that happen, but I want to save our time to hear more of what you were saying. But basically, from that point is when I realized that I need to start praying, and I need to learn how to pray so that I'm prepared for things like this, for this warfare. So you were going to say something else before I cut you off, please.
Well, I remember, kind of on those notes, one of the prayers that still always sticks with many of us, but even stuck with me throughout then, was the Jesus prayer. And I remember even then believing in its true power because of the evil that did abide. I mean, to put it in the easiest term, I mean, this has been over accumulation of years. It's happened at different points. I mean, I've seen literally the faces of demons face to face. Very, very, very scary things at the time. One of the instances that actually happened this past summer, before I started attending church regularly, which was one of the eye-opening events for me. I've actually only shared this with a few people as well, so I'm very happy to be able to share it here. I remember texting this to my friend immediately, as pretty much as it had happened. I had gone to sleep, or so I had thought, and what had kind of happened was, from what I can recall off the top of my head, I went to somewhere of eternal torment. I was unable to speak. I was trying to get the Jesus prayer out because I knew there was evil trying to drag me. I remember literally pulling myself with my arms, crawling across the floor in my house. And this did not happen in real time, but the thing that made it most alarming to me was when I finally came out of it, I wasn't asleep. I was laying supine. I never lay supine when I go to sleep, unless I'm like in a recliner. This was in my own bed. And to me, that was a very, very scary and a very real thing that had happened. And I didn't really know what to do with that at the time. That was just an unreal event that had kind of occurred, being physically dragged and just feeling that eternal torment feeling of being unable to speak and to pray for the Lord, because it was unreal. It was unreal to be able to even experience it.
So what was your response to that going, the next few days?
The next few days, frankly, I really can't remember an entirety of kind of what happened in the next few days. I would say it was in that next few months that kind of brought me in. I do remember when I was out of it, I do remember saying the Jesus prayer and, praying before I went to sleep to try and ward it off. And I mean, I had done the same with other interactions. I remember there was one time, because for the longest time, I could always feel evil around me. I could even see it, as I recall. I always remember there being in the corner of my eye a little black shadow that would follow me around. no matter where I was, especially in my own home. And I remember there was one day I was fed up and tired of it. And this was again before I was still fully back into the Orthodox faith. I was burning sage at the time, and I believe with a combination of the Jesus prayer and just basically trying to cast out and take it out of my house, out of the land that we're on, out of my soul and everything. I remember quite physically, because my eyes were closed, I quite remember seeing the actual demon there and then just vanish.
Wow. And I don't know how you have interpreted this, but it strikes me to say that in the Orthodox Church specifically, we talk about guardian angels, but many saints and elders have also spoken of demons that follow us around from birth and sort of know our tics and know what really gets us going. And they, in a very real sense, it's sort of like the caricature of the angel and the demon on your shoulder that you see in cartoons. I just wanted to throw that out there. It's I can't imagine how frightening that must have been.
It was very, very frightening. And at the time, I think I had kind of brushed. I don't say I brushed it off, but I thought it was over. There was another time when I was in like transcendent meditation kind of things, and there was only one time I attained to that level, and I thought it was the best thing at the time, where I released all thought, everything. And again, I did go somewhere, and for me at that time, it was somewhere peaceful. And this is all I remember. It was a very vivid thing. Anyways, I went to the mountain somewhere. I'm assuming somewhere in Japan, and there was just one Buddhist monk sitting there, and that was it. I didn't see his face, nothing. And then I brought myself back out of it.
So would this be considered astral projection? Were you into astral projection or anything like that? Or was this just sort of entering into this meditative space and kind of it just happened?
It more or less just kind of happened. I had always tried to kind of reach that thing. And so for me, I had always thought from that point on that was like my guardian, like he was my guardian, whoever he was, because at that time it had brought me a moment of peace, and I had tried and tried and tried, and I had never been able to reach that same level again. So in a lot of ways it became very unreal for me, because, at what point can I reach that again? I'm trying to think what else. Those were really the biggest kind of moments that kind of, brought me through those sort of beliefs. I mean, for the longest time too, I've always had a very strong interest in sci-fi. A lot of that kind of came about my senior year of high school, because I took a sci-fi English course. That was my English credit, and it was very, very good. I still say there's a lot I still would take from that class, just in my general perception of writing, and especially in the creative writing field. But I had always a very strong interest and a very real fear of aliens.
Interesting.
And I've always had a very strong interest in the paranormal in the same sense. Ghost hunting and all those sort of things. Any kind of phenomena I always had a very real interest in. And I think some of that might have been bringing on kind of what had occurred as well.
Sure, because it is opening up yourself to these kind of realities. I think that's one thing that we don't often think about when it is entertainment, classified as entertainment, supernatural, paranormal, these sorts of things. Another point I want to draw out is when we speak about fear of seeing a demon, or even experiencing the presence of a demon. You can also experience the presence of saints, angels, this sorts of stuff. This is not uncommon at all in Orthodoxy. But there is a level, and my hair stands on end even thinking about experiences that I've had. There is a level of unnerving. There's this unnerving feeling. It goes beyond being afraid in a way that I'm not going to pass a test, worry. It goes beyond fear of going up a roller coaster or anything like this. It even goes beyond maybe fear of watching some of these paranormal movies. There is a cold, unnerving reality that hits you and is almost paralyzing. And this is why I think it's so important that we are training ourselves in prayer, and in a sense, like, obviously we don't want to experience, I don't want to experience the this sort of thing, but it is important for us to remember, especially if we're going through a time of spiritual dryness, that our effort in this time of spiritual dryness really counts as double effort in a sense. Saint Sophrony said that it's like double effort. It's like doubling your your gains, so to speak. But so how did you wind up getting to a place where you realize you need the faith, you need to begin practicing this?
So it actually kind of goes back again to this summer. I don't remember if it was in this. It might have been late spring. Or no, it was, because it was still during Lent. My uncle had asked me to help out at his parish, and his parish is about an hour from me, so it's a little bit of a ways. Connecticut, we're very we like things to be somewhat close. 15-20 minutes is close for us, but an hour is far away. Because the Metropolitan was coming, so they needed as much help as they could, and they wanted some help down in the kitchen. And so at that point, I had kind of started to really, really grow even more of an interest. And following that, I remember Thomas Sunday being a very touching moment for me at the cemetery, because fortunately, even with everything that's going on with my original family's home parish, things that's one thing that's always been great, is that Thomas Sunday is still always there's always clergy there to make sure to bless the graves. And I remember just it being a very real feeling in the cemetery and a very real understanding. For one, my grandfather's name was Thomas, and I don't remember where my uncle had gotten it, but my grandfather, for the longest time, he was looking for an icon of St. Thomas for the longest time, and I want to say it was one of the times that my uncle went over to the Middle East. He had brought one back or whatever, so that was part of that. But it was after my grandmother had passed away as well, which was this past year in 2021. So that kind of really resonated with me, and so kind of through the summer I really started to get more core into that belief. And during the summer we again went to visit my uncle's parish, because he was celebrating his 30 years of priesthood, which was a very significant event for him. And I remember hearing the sermon. It just hit me in a different way. It felt very real. It applied very much so to me and how my life was going at that point. And I said, this is exactly what I need to do. And I remember just looking up at all the iconography, because his parish, it's just got so much iconography. It's literally covered. And I just remember seeing all of it, and I just remember saying to myself, I'm home. I'm finally home. And from that point on, the next Sunday, on, I made it a mission to get back into my faith, and I started attending the local parish that I do, which is the same one my grandfather attended for the last 4 years of his life.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful to hear that, you're baptized, you have this seal of the Holy Spirit, and around 5, 6 maybe, you become less active. But then through various means, first of all through the culture, which often is denigrated as, it's more culture than it is the faith. But I really want to draw out this point that the culture can actually bring people in. And this is why ethnic parishes will have their Greek fests or their other festivals and such. So I want to draw that out for people. Like, the culture itself is, specifically if you have family heritage in it, it can begin to bring you back to the faith. I do wonder myself what that looks like for us as a American culture. Not sure how to develop an American culture in Orthodoxy, but it takes time.
I've questioned the same things.
So I'm curious, your current parish, is it, do you have a lot of the ethnic kind of cultural celebrations now? Is it more on the American side? What does that look like for you?
It seems, especially here on the East Coast, there's actually a lot less of the cultural. Basically, so from our original home parish, from where the split is, the other parish still does the Slavic food festival. That used to be our church bazaar back then. And besides the Greeks, for the most part, it seems that a lot of us, especially under the OCA on the East Coast, kind of seem to be more or less just in the American side of things, unless there's a strong group of people that are either Russian or Greek, or I think there's even a Serbian parish. But for the most part, there was a lot of Russian and Greek, but it seems now, especially on the Russian side, I don't know if the modern tensions of the war really helped the situation at all. But there's not as much a lot of the cultural influence as there was. Like, we don't do bazaars and we don't do the same things anymore because, unfortunately, all the people that used to be the ones that did that have passed away. Like, my grandmother, she was one of the pierogi makers for the bazaar. That was, one of their jobs.
Yeah.
So we've lost a lot of those kind of people.
What is the dynamic as far as age dynamic at your parish? Because I know on the East Coast specifically, at least my limited experience out on the East Coast, there's a lot of parishes that have a mainly older population. We're
actually a fairly younger parish. We have a lot of younger families, a lot of children in the parish, which is great. We have one very, very large family. I'm trying to think. What do they have? 7, 8 kids, or a very large amount of kids. So we do very, very well in those respects. And plus, we're in between 2 colleges, so we.
Oh, great.
So we do get some of the college kids as well. A lot of them end up going to the Greek parish that's actually on campus.
Okay.
So I think a lot of that's just closeness for them, but we're only about 20 minutes from that campus.
Sure.
But we get a fair amount.
As someone who's had Orthodoxy in your family for a decent amount of time, and having your own experience of falling away from the faith and coming back to the faith, what is your view or opinion on converts that are coming to the faith, but also attempting to appropriate a culture that is not necessarily American? I'm not sure. That's a pretty convoluted question, but I guess what I'm saying is, in some cases we have, and this, it can draw the otherness of the church, and the different culture can draw people, just like your own culture drew you back to the faith. So I don't want to denigrate that at all. But I do also want to make a distinction between the culture and the faith that we hold, because you don't have to do something a certain way in order for it to be Orthodox, like the chanting styles between the Greek and the Slavic churches are different.
Right. Yeah, I kind of take the stance that that's kind of, we're all Orthodox, so, whatever you feel is where you're connected, whether that's being more connected to a Greek saint and you go to a Russian church, that's totally okay, or the vice versa. I'm definitely really all for although I think it's important to hold on to some of our ethnic heritage and some of our traditions. I think it needs to be done in more of a sense that it's held more on a neutral perspective and it's not drawing people away from the church, because I think that's one of our biggest challenges on the East Coast is the ethnic stigmatism. I mean, even since coming back into the faith, the amount of people I've talked to that have been in my personal circle for the past 3 years, some of my coworkers are like, "Oh, so you're Greek?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm not Greek." So it's like a whole thing. You kind of have to explain that everybody can be Orthodox. You don't have to be of a certain ethnicity.
It's crazy because I even have a friend who has his PhD in biblical archaeology, and I gave a guest lecture at one of his college courses that he was teaching on the Great Schism from an Orthodox perspective, and it came up in the question and answer section, like, what's the deal with like Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox? It's like denominations in Orthodoxy. And even my friend didn't know that we were all in communion with one another. So I wonder how we could get that word out there for people, because a lot of people think, oh, it's the same thing as Protestantism.
And I do see a lot of that stigma. A lot of people I've talked to besides the Roman Catholics don't even know we exist.
Yeah.
Being in New England, we're very much so rooted in a lot of Protestantism, a lot of Methodists, and a lot of Congregationalists. Mostly being that's what our original founders are. I mean, there's a Congregationalist church literally a stone throws away I could walk to from my house, and that's been the center of the town since the founding of the town. And I do see a very large uprising in my area of the evangelical Christian movement. To put it lightly, there's literally one of these mega churches that essentially bought the old scout camp that's not too far from me. And to me, I'm like, well, what's really going on there,
Yeah.
I just think more people need to know that, everybody can be Orthodox, and we'll all eventually kind of find that.
Right, and you're welcome to visit. It doesn't matter what your religion is or your ethnicity. The number of questions that we get on the YouTube page semi-frequently on videos that we posted a couple of years ago are, can I visit? Am I allowed to visit? What should I do if I visit? And anyone's allowed to visit. You can just show up. You can email the priest and ask. Like, all of the contact information is usually on the web. And I wonder how we can better take this into the world, because I know when we became Orthodox over a decade ago, there was not a ton of stuff. I think the YouTube channel that I started in 2015 even was one of the first kind of YouTube channels. In addition to Steve, I think Steve Christoforou started B2B around the same time. But before that, there was just a few archdiocese 55-minute videos of people in front of the iconostas, and it was just them talking. And it's funny now because we've moved more into a talking kind of YouTube again. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I wonder how to get this out into the world, and let people know that they're welcome. I think really maybe just living the life, and people being curious. Oh, why are you, why don't you want to go get ribs on Friday?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of how I've always viewed it since coming back is, obviously we've discussed in the Discord the differences, in how orthodoxy has changed, like you've said, over even just the past 10 years. And I think, I do think some of that's internet orthodoxy kind of pushing some people away.
Sure.
And that we just have to live the life the best we can and be a good example. And people will inquire based off of us being an example. We can't be pushy, because I feel that's the same thing. That's why people tend to make fun of the, street preachers and things like that, because they're very pushy.
Yeah.
And it's very off-putting.
Yeah, and you do see that online in Orthodoxy, which is unfortunate. This is one of the characteristics of the sectarian mindset, as Dr. David Ford has put it, is an overly strict way of speaking to and about people outside of the church, and that's something really to guard against, because the fact is they're not in the church. We don't have to. They're not held to the standards that we are held to in the church. If they are not a part of the church, we cannot expect them to act in a way as dictated by the church or the church's morality. It is up to us to live that out and to show them that life. And since you mentioned it, the Discord, links in the description if you want to come in and ask questions. Zach and I are there. There are other people there. We just sort of hang out. I don't really push the Discord or any of those links, but there's a bunch of links in the description if you want to if you want to check them out.
Yeah, the Discord's a great resource.
So are you working as an EMT now?
I am. Currently, I'm working as an EMT full-time. I have been for the past 3 years or so, and it's been very, very, very daunting. It's been very wearing.
I can imagine. The EMTs, I've known a number of EMTs, and that job is not easy.
No. We do inter-facility transfers, so bringing people to and from hospitals to nursing homes and vice versa, but we're also contracted for 911 services. And I think some of that is more or less where a lot of my stress comes from. But, I aspire to be in law enforcement hopefully soon. So, regardless, I've seemed to choose paths that are very quite daunting and take kind of a special kind of approach to be in.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So I have another question for people that have been baptized as Cradle Orthodox and have sort of fallen away from the faith. If they are watching or listening to this and they're starting that journey, what is your advice that you would give to them, if you have any, or thoughts about that?
Just attend the liturgy, whether it be from a parish that's not your original parish, because that was one of my things. And my current parish, I guess, for my priest, kind of says is kind of the norm, honestly, is a lot of people that come from other parishes that come in the same sort of circumstances don't want to go back to their old parish. They come here. Just go to a parish, find a good priest, and just start there, because you're not going to find all the answers you want on the internet, and the only way you're going to get the answers you want is in the church with a spiritual father. In my opinion, there's no other way, because that was one of my biggest things. I was so nervous about going back, like, I'm going to screw something up, I'm going to, you know what I mean? And just going, it finally broke the ice and just kept me there.
Yeah, so making that first step down the journey and not staying behind the computer screen, maybe, as would be the temptation, I know, for a number of people. And attending the liturgy is, I remember Archimandrite Sergius of St. Tikhon's Monastery beating this into our heads, essentially, in spirituality class. The liturgy is the most important thing, point blank. It is how you acquire the mind of Christ. It's just how you acquire this way of living the Orthodox faith. And even if you're not able to commune right away, be it because you're nervous to go up, or be it because you are someone looking into orthodoxy. Just attending, just because you cannot commune. Now, don't get me wrong, communing is important, but just attending the liturgy is grace-filled, and it will affect you the more you go. And as you continue to go, as you continue to hear the prayers offered up, they will write themselves on your heart, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
So, do you have siblings, if you don't mind me asking?
I do. I have two. I'm the middle. I have an older brother and a younger brother. And actually, technically, I do have a half-sister from my dad's first marriage, but she decided to not be in our lives many, many years ago.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we've found out she's unfortunately fallen into drug addiction and all that.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I was wondering if your brothers had a similar experience as you, or if they continued in the faith, or if they decided not to continue at all.
So both of them, they're just kind of doing their own thing. They haven't decided to come into the faith.
Okay.
I'm not sure that they will. Even my parents, I think my dad might be more inclined to than my mother, but that's just that comes with time.
Yeah. It's hard when you don't have family in the faith, or family that are practicing. If you're Cradle, that can be a difficult situation. And a number of the people recently, over the last couple of years, that have come into the Discord have been younger kids, boys, usually 16, 17, that are still living at home, maybe even 15, and their parents don't want them to go to the liturgy. And I just want to take, because this is also a frequent question, I think it's important to note that, look, you honor your parents. You are going to grow up. It's hard. There's no doubt, especially when you yearn for it.
Absolutely.
But just know that this is sort of an aside, but because it came up, I want to say, just honor your parents and do your prayers. You can pray at home. Our Lord honors that. That is important as well. I mean, you even look at Saint Mary of Egypt. She did not receive Eucharist for 40 years, and she just spent time repenting, and then she's a saint, and she's commemorated on some big days, man.
Oh, absolutely. I always, one of the stories that always goes back for me was the story of Saint Thecla and Saint Ignatius being thrown to the lions.
No.
And with that, I mean, everything is just at God's will. It's not directly up to us. We don't demand things, and as long as you pray and you do as you're supposed to, and like you said, honor your parents. That time will come, and that will be chosen.
Was there anything else that you had thought of in preparation that you want to share?
Let me look through. Well, I mean, yeah, kind of. I guess, I've always kind of been more of a traditional, valued kind of person. Even throughout high school, I really, still kind of held a lot of those very hardcore, traditional, really American values. Being there for your family, and sticking to that very traditional sense. And the more and more the world has changed, even over the past 2 years, and how I've seen the world change, I've really found that my faith kind of brings me back more center to where those beliefs kind of were to begin with. And they line up perfectly in that sense.
Yeah, and that's a real blessing too, that you found yourself. Do you know what facilitated your holding to these traditional values, or?
I think my upbringing, honestly.
Okay. Yeah.
My parents, for the most part, have been very, very traditional. My dad was a military man, and my mother kind of has grown into a similar belief system. That we really have to try and be a very traditional. You have to have a traditional family mindset to really keep a good family together. And, even through my parents' struggles and all that, back in '07, my father had lost his job and all that. My mother had just gotten over a very bad tib-fib fracture, and then we were in a car accident.
Oh, wow.
And all that. So, those kind of values really, I think are really what helped keep us together, of being there for each other. Even though very frustrating in my teenage years, that they were very hard on me in a lot of ways. It was really a true blessing, and I understand now why.
Definitely, and you hear a lot about this today, even with the traditional values and why they're so important. In the midst of all this deconstruction of values of the last 50 years, we have found ourselves, I think, in a place where we are realizing that this is the only way to productively move forward, is to hold on to some of these things. But Zach, thanks so much for talking with me.
Absolutely.
If you guys have questions for Zach, if you find yourself in a similar situation, please don't hesitate to comment, to reach out, to join the Discord. Zach will be there as he's able, and I'll be there as well. So thanks again so much, Zach, for speaking and sharing your story.
Absolutely.
As always, thanks for watching. If you haven't already and you're able to, please consider joining as a member here on YouTube. It's $2 a month, and it helps us work towards sustainability. You can also join on Patreon. Those links are in the description, as well as links to a bunch of other fun things, so be sure to check those out.